well-known saying that goes always give the hardest job to the laziest person because they will find the easiest way to do it. What is the best real-life example to this you have seen? Story 1 was a temp. Got hired for the day to print 30 packets with 100 pages each. Why would it take a day? I asked. Our printer doesn't collate the pages, so it will take you the day to sort the pages into the 30 packets, they said. Right? It was a standard office Xerox printer. It took me all of 30 seconds to find and click the collate button. Clicked the staple button while at it. All got printed by itself in a nice staple packets, and I got paid to browse internet for the day. They thought I was a genius for fixing their printer and gave me glowing recommendations to the temp agency that led to more jobs. Story 2 of my last job, a truck suspension shop. We did inventory every December, and it was someone's job to count all the washers and screws of every size. It was my first inventory, and I casually mentioned that they should just weigh one screw or washer, then weigh them all and divide the weight to get the count. Everyone looked at me like I had given them the key to the universe. Counting washers and screws went from a day or two to just a few hours. Story 3, I read a comment on here a while back about a college kid who picked up an office job over one summer. He became friends with an older lady at the front desk who always needed help figuring out Excel. He kept finding shortcuts for her and eventually wrote scripts for her that took a load of work off her plate. By the end of the summer, he had made her job so easy that they decided they didn't need her to do it anymore. They fired her. Story 4, I work in a semi-warehouse environment, and we have to track where items are at all times. When we move X item from location A to location B, we had to type out the to and from locations. We do this hundreds of times a shift. I went online to a free barcode maker website and spent about 20 minutes making location barcodes. I save hours a day by scanning barcodes. Story 5, herding yak with a drone takes the cake for me. They run from it and oddly fear it, which is surprising considering they have literally zero aerial predators. We only did it a few times because it really makes them uneasy and doesn't treat them well. But it is very effective and easy, and you can herd them from over 12 a mile away from inside the house. Edit, I'm really surprised how much this blew up. I've never had so many post replies, but I'll try to get around to answering as many questions as possible. My post history is predominantly yakking off and tower climbing stuff, so ID suggests going there if you're curious. Story 6, I used to deliver beer. I did not like delivering beer. I may have ended up with 30 stops in a day, including deliveries that the customer would call into our office for. I used to bring extra beer and blank invoices with me on the truck to prevent having to drive back to my warehouse to deliver one keg to a place that I was currently across the street from. 7 years later, the driver of that route is still doing that. Story 7, automated 70 of my job in a large finance firm as an intern, never disclosed it, and got paid easy money for 6 months. I spent the time doing courses and applying for my grad school. Got my admission letter during the final 2 weeks of my internship and never looked back. Pro tip, Python and Excel can be your best friend. Obligatory edit, I went to sleep and this thread blew up. Thank you for your stories, questions, and comments. I'm trying to get to as many as possible. Story 8, a programmer outsourced his own job overseas, paying Chinese programmers 1/5 of his salary to write code for him. While he spent his days surfing Reddit and watching cat videos, his performance reviews praised him for clean, well-written code and called him the best developer in the building. Story 9, worked in a huge hotel by the airport. We had layover with over 400 people. I think we were 3 employees. They had buffet for dinner and then left to go to bed since it was 1 or 2 a.m. Rule was we should always go to the room and pick up as many plates as we could and then bring them to the cleaner. Took for ages and I wanted to go home. I decided to roll out the cart and collect the plates and put them on the cart. Guests were seeing it and started putting their plates on the cart when they left. All of a sudden, hundreds of people cleaned up their own stuff. Duty manager saw it, and I thought he would blast me since the hotel was a 5-star place. He just looked at me, smiled, and said, "That's why I like to hire lazy people. They think of ways to finish work faster." Story 10, I worked at a chain restaurant, and in my last few months, there we got those stupid table Ziasks that customers could pay at. There was a survey at the end of every transaction, and our managers added new performance metrics based on how many people paid using the Ziask, and also how well our service was based on the surveys. One would just fill the surveys out himself after his customers left and gave himself 5 stars in everything. Dude was always ranked top of the servers. Genius. In high school, we had to do 4 book reports every year. A friend of mine did his on each Lord of the Rings books in the Hobbit freshman year and turned in the same 4 book reports for the rest of his time in high school. You switched English teachers every year, so no one ever caught on. I was never brave enough to try the same thing. Story 11, I have an example of how the truly lazy will sabotage tracking, so no one knows is broken. There was this guy at a software company that does integrated software systems. He hated his boss and his job, and apparently most of his team. Every time he was assigned a bug to fix, he would mark it resolved and assign it to a no-reply email address associated with the team. The odd thing that I don't understand is how he managed to keep issues from getting escalated to other real people. At any rate, no one caught on. When he found a new job and a couple people on his team took him out for drinks, he said, "You should look into all the bugs I fixed. I never did any of that." So the guys who took him out for drinks went back and audited his work and were like, holy, he not only did nothing, he had identified issues for like a year, was tiling a bathroom floor. One young guy I was working with was cleaning up when we were done. I told him to take the leftover tile back downstairs to the truck and then went back to cleaning what I was doing. 10 seconds later, I hear this huge crash and then a soft "oh," right? He had gone out onto the balcony and dropped them down to the truck, shattering over 100 worth of tile. He said he thought it would be faster. He wasn't exactly wrong. Story 12, maybe not the most impressive story here, but I thought it was a great sidestep of effort. Nonetheless, coworker of mine had to get rid of a smaller junk fiberglass boat with no trailer. Our other coworkers are all telling him how much time and money he's going to need to spend to get rid of it. And he's just saying, "Oh, is that so?" He took off one day and sat down on his lawn with a cooler of beer. That day was garbage day. Inevitably, the trash guys roll up. He hands each of them a cold beer and says, "Hey boys, got 50 for each of you if you help me out real quick." They fed the entire 12-foot boat into the packer, crushing 2 feet at a time. Story 13, I remember having to peel 20 kilograms of charred eggplant at a restaurant I worked in. I asked the chef if there was an easier way to do it. His reply was, "Yep, get someone else to do it." Story 14, in corporate accounting, and in the only one of my department with a CPA, of course, I have to take continuing education for my license. And I usually take as many hours of Excel courses as I can each year. By learning the keyboard shortcuts, advanced formulas, and a bunch of useful hidden features in Excel, I'm able to get most of my work done in less than 2 hours, then spend the rest of the day browsing Reddit and watching YouTube videos. Thank goodness our cubicle walls are high, or I'm sure they would have fired me by now for being on my phone 6 hours each day. Story 15, there's a story that I've heard a few dozen times about a toothpaste company that had accidentally sent out cases of their product that had a few empty single boxes of toothpaste. The company had endeavored not only to rectify their mistake, but to ensure they did not repeat it. They hired an engineering company that designed a scale and alarm shutdown system. If an empty carton was passed down the production line, klaxons would be triggered and a full stop would initiate until the offending box was recovered and an all clear had been entered into the computer system before production could resume. The company paid through the nose, but was ultimately pleased with their fail-safe, and the engineers patted each other on the back. A few months pass, and the engineers returned for quality control. The toothpaste company reported zero margin of error for weeks. Turns out, one of the minimum wage hairnet types on the assembly line didn't appreciate the sound of klaxons or working with computers, so he or she had aimed a large fan at the production line before the scale that blew the lighter, empty cartons off of the conveyor belt. Problem solved. Story 16, during my intern, my professor gave me line graphs made on paper and asked me to find the coordinates by drawing horizontal and vertical lines. It would have taken hours, if not days. I thought to myself, I couldn't be the first one who is lazy AF, so I Googled it. Found this cool free-to-use software web digitizer. Step 1, scan the graph. Step 2, mark the X and Y axes in the picture. Step 3, grab a beer because you got to the nicest MF graph that you couldn't have drawn by yourself in a million years. My professor was so happy, she asked me to document the method and mail it across the entire department. Edit, I am so sorry people for not replying earlier. I had no idea this would blow up, so I didn't bother to check Reddit at work. To answer your question, yes, I did share my original method with my professor and the entire department. 1, she was a really supportive professor, and I wanted to return her favors even if this software might have been the tiniest help to her work. 2, the original developer of this software made it available online for free. He could have made a paid service, and believe me, researchers would have paid because it is that good, but he kept it free for all of us to use, and it was my responsibility to share his work as much as I could. Link for those interested to try this software. Cheers to the developer, Ankit Rohtuggi. Story 17, worked as a cashier during the holiday season back when I was 16. The supermarket was selling drinks by the boxes, and at that time, we only had barcode scanners that was at the front of the computer. No gun-type scanners existed. I was lazy and didn't want to carry boxes up to the scanner. So I politely asked my customers if I could carve out the barcode from their box to scan and keep. Some agreed, some didn't want to, but eventually I managed to amass all the barcodes needed, labeled them, and kept them in a file for easy reference. Apparently, some other cashier got green-eyed at my smart move and complained to the chief cashier, who promptly lectured me on bullshit alert how it's dangerous for me to scan such barcodes, as I might scan the wrong things. She told me to throw it all away and carry the boxes like I was meant to. I mean, I was young, so I could, but the other cashiers were older and some were elderly and needed the customers themselves to help carry the boxes to the scanner. But whatever, I guess jealousy trumped common sense. Story 18, I used to process HSA claims. Around 10 years ago, one system we had to use back then was an old terminal program that took 4 line items per page. That's it for usual claim. No big deal, not too hard to keep track of things over 2 or 3 pages for a longer claim. Most fit on one. However, we had the dreaded shoebox claims. This was the person who saved up every receipt all year in a metaphorical shoebox and sent everything in once a year to empty their account. We hated them. Dozens or hundreds of line items totaling thousands of dollars. Just because you only have 500 in your HSA doesn't mean we get to stop there. If you send in 4,000 in receipts, I gotta account for it all. Totally killed your numbers for the day, and they track claims per hour religiously. The main issue was double-checking that everything added up right when you were done entering it. At 4 items a page, it took forever to tally, so I made an Excel sheet. It was laid out so I could enter every single line, then run a macro that would calculate the needed totals, and dump all the text to a text file formatted exactly, so I could select 4 items at a time and paste them directly into the terminal window from the default started cursor position, and every field would fill in automatically. Copy, paste, next, copy, paste, next, copy, paste, next, etc., etc. It easily halved my entry times, with way less work. Finding any typos was much easier. I just had to look at one column organized sheet instead of scrolling through God knows how many pages of terminal text. It was great. I showed it to my manger so the rest of my team could use it. She was horrified I would use something like that, as no human was double-checking as they went along. This despite demonstrable improvements to my error rates on large claims after I started using it. She ordered me to stop using it and forbid anyone in her team from automating any part of their job at all. I kept using it for all of the 2 months I stayed there after that. I had some of the highest claim per hour numbers and lowest error rates on our team. I never developed any more tools for them. I don't know that I have a specific example, but a buddy of mine and I used to spend our time working out the most efficient way to do our jobs. We used to tell ourselves I'm not being lazy, I'm just being efficient. It became an almost daily thing. Why are we doing it this way? This is stupid. There must be an easier way. Then we'd find that and implement it. 9 months ago, ID made my job so easy it was eliminated. Be careful what you wish for. Story 19, someone gave me a report they'd been doing manually for literally years, using nothing but Excel and Access databases that took 2 people upwards of nearly 3 hours to complete. Got that automated down to 30 seconds in a few days, and not about your stupid VLOOKUP bullshit, Brittany. Story 20, be nice to your build engineers. They know how to take the easy road, hey, erase the full text for those scrolling by XXX. So, our build engineer has left for another company. The dude was literally living inside the terminal. You know, that type of guy who loves Vim, creates diagrams in Dot, and writes wiki posts in Markdown. If something, anything, requires more than 90 seconds of his time, he writes a script to automate that. XXX. So we're sitting here looking through his, legacy XXX. You're going to love this XXX. Smack my up. SH. Sends a text message late at work to his wife, apparently. Automatically picks reasons from an array of strings. Randomly. Runs inside a cron job. The job fires if there are active SSH sessions on the server after 9 p.m. with his login. XXX Kumar -SH scans the inbox for emails from Kumar DBA at our clients. Looks for keywords like help, trouble, sorry, etc. If keywords are found, the script SSHs into the client server and rolls back the staging database to the latest backup. Then send a reply, no worries, mate. Be careful next time. Xangover, SH. Another cron job that is set to specific dates. Sends automated emails like not feeling well, gonna work from home, etc. Adds a random reason from another predefined array of strings. Fires if there are no interactive sessions on the server at 8:45 a.m. XXX, and the Oscar goes to fucking coffee. SH. This one waits exactly 17 seconds, then opens an SSH session to our coffee machine. We had no frickin' idea the coffee machine is on the network, runs Linux, and has SSHD up and running, and sends some weird gibberish to it. Looks binary. Turns out this thing starts brewing a mid-sized half CAF latte and waits another 24 seconds before pouring it into a cup. The timing is exactly how long it takes to walk to the machine from the dude's desk. XXX wholly am keeping those. I did this. A few years back, I was roommates with a super mechanically inclined dude. Our top-loading clothes washer stopped working well. because the lid got a little warped and didn't trip the safe switch for the spin cycle to run anymore. He was all geared up to pull the washer out, take it apart, bend the lid back into proper shape, and reseat the sensor so it would run properly. I told him to hold off. I put a load of laundry in and popped a 1/4-inch shim under the lid. It ran perfectly. Story 21, I worked a summer at a mortgage company as an assistant to the underwriters. My only job was printing documents and then hole punching them to put in folders. They had a super fancy Xerox printer that basically did my entire job for me. But the underwriters at this company didn't know how to click through printer settings to make the machine hole punch as it was being printed. I showed them how to do it, and they resisted it super hard like they didn't trust it. So I got to keep my job, but what was supposed to take me all day literally took me about 20 to 30 minutes first thing in the morning. So they started assigning me real tasks and even offered to keep me on to eventually become an underwriter too. Because I was so sharp, I knew how to use the very expensive printer they already had. I was just about to start grad school, so I had to politely decline, but I'm pretty sure they didn't hire someone to replace me when I left. TLDR, they had a printer that already did my job for me, but didn't know how to use it. I showed them. Story 22, when I worked at an inpatient unit, one of the tasks would be to do a check-in with every patient. There were about 100 when we were full. Nobody wanted that task. It would usually get split up, except this one guy who was pretty lazy always wanted it, and I didn't understand it because he was lazy. Finally, one day, I was walking out for a break, and I figured out what he did. He plopped himself right beside the food line door and wouldn't let people go in until they did their check-in with him. That's not how it was supposed to be done. It was supposed to be a chance for clients to connect with staff. But he'd get it done in an hour or so for the whole unit and be done for the day, edited to add. Yes, it was in a mental health facility. Kind of figure my username would give that away. This wasn't to assess for suicidality. That was a separate task in which people were given as much privacy as possible during morning meds. You sign something when you enter a group treatment center that says you understand that its group treatment and confidentiality is limited. Story 23, I once was a temp at a tiny office on a construction site in around 2003. I was only there for one day while the regular person was on some training. They sat me down and told me that I just needed to copy all these numbers from one program to another. So I selected them, hit Control-C and Control-V. They stared at me. Turns out about 60 of this woman's time had been spent manually typing numbers from one place to another. Story 24, I was working a kids' chess summer camp with this guy who just horked down pot like you wouldn't believe, still a far better chess player than me. One day, the kids were being particularly rambunctious, and I told him he had to take them outside to get their energy out. He had them spend the next hour doing American Ninja Warrior on the jungle gym playground. I hadn't even heard of the show, but it was a group of young boys like 6 to 12, so they all adored it. This coworker loved to get super stoned and watch it. Don't know if he was high at the camp, but he just got to sit on a bench and tell kids their time was getting slower when they did stunts, and they just scurried and jumped around faster. Story 25, my parents were having a summer get-together a couple of years ago, and my dad wanted my brother and me to dig a small pit for a bonfire. He handed us 2 shovels and left us to dig. My brother went and started up our old tractor, drove it across the lawn, dropped the bucket into the earth, and drove forward a few feet. The pit ended up a little larger than what we had planned, but once we lined it with stones, it was actually a pretty nice pit, edited my brother, and out of my brother and me. Story 26, a few years ago, my mom was tasked with fixing my grandparents' toilet while we were visiting for the holidays. The toilet reservoir was constantly filling and running, and thus flooding the bathroom, because the buoy arm wasn't lifting high enough from the water in the reservoir to switch off the water flow. My mom, who is normally a very practical person, had been tackling the issue for hours. She was pretty distraught, thinking we would have to order a new buoy arm, maybe even a new sensor or switch, and pull the whole assembly apart to replace everything. She was planning out a trip to Lowe's and pricing things out when I walked in. I took one look at it and bent the metal arm the buoy was attached to down, so the arm had a slight upwards curve. The buoy still reached the same level in the reservoir, but registered on the sensor as higher because of the curve in the arm. Problem solved. Rangers lead the way. I watched it dawn on her what I had done, and she just looked at me like I had a third eye and said, "You little, I've been getting my kick by this thing for 4 hours, and you fix it in 4 seconds." She was very happy. I saved her from more work and spending more money. She calls me her little toilet engineer from time to time. I work on aircraft. It's mildly demeaning. Edit, and now my most upvoted comment is about a shitter I fixed once. Perfect. Story 27, I worked in a CNC shop. There would be a pile of jobs that needed to be done for the month. Some took days to run while others were generally quick. The record for jobs done in one day was 8. What I did was look through all the jobs and organize them by setup, meaning every job has a setup time. Can take an hour to get all the tooling together, setting up the cutting table, and setting the part square to the table so the machine can gauge where the part is, so when I insert the code into the machine, it can run flawlessly and drill, mill, tap whatever within a literally hair measurement for every single job. Majority of parts use standard tooling, and I have automatic tool changing with 20 pockets. Long story short, I figure out how to line up the jobs so they all have the same setup, blew the record out of the water with 30 jobs done in one day, saving the company tens of thousands in work hours. All because I didn't feel like doing all the setups that day. Story 28, I am in rat quote, and I don't like it. When I was at university, I had an IT help desk job for one of the colleges. My team was tasked with taking inventory on every computer in every room of like 5 buildings, computer aim, some college ID code, the Dell serial number, all kinds of stuff. I mean, it took ages to gather all the information in just I&E room. About a week into the process, I decided that ID had enough of manual, writing everything down. On my work machine, I just started running all of the get CMD commands I could find, and eventually had a batch file on a flash drive that would just save a computer's information as a TXT file on the flash drive. So I'd walk into a room, log into each computer, run my file, then log off. I went from doing a couple of rooms a day to doing a couple of floors a day. I still had to input everything into the system, but that felt great. Story 29, got hired into a plant that just got a big new job building stuff for the military. My job was materials associate, which basically meant I drove a forklift and stage parts that were built. The engineers came up with a floor plan for all of the parts and where they needed to be staged. They used fancy lasers and measuring devices and built it all in CAD. After telling them it wouldn't work, they said, well, let's see you do a better job. I organized the entire 50,000 square feet warehouse so that each part was close to the machines that used them. It followed the first in, first out method, and each department knew where their parts went when they were done, making them put up signs and whatnot. After that, my job was basically pointless because the warehouse ran itself. I decided to teach myself how to use the welding robots in my downtime. Fast forward 3 years, and now I'm an automation engineer at one of the largest part supplier in the industry. P.S. Robots are very easy to learn and operate if you're struggling to find what you want to do in your career. Places are hiring with minimal experience too, cause there is a huge lack of people in the automation field. Get a 1-year college certification in mechatronics, and you can make around 40 to 60K starting, depending on location. Edit, a lot of you showed interest in getting into this field. I made a very thorough posting on job profiles if you would like to learn more about getting into this field and what to expect. Check it out here. Story 30, my dad and I were working on my grandma's water heater a couple of years ago. We needed a cork or something to go over the end of the pipe. I had a bottle of Coke in my hand. I downed the Coke and put the cap on the end of the pipe as a joke, but it fit perfectly, so we kept it there. When my grandma sold the house 5 years later, the cap was still on the end of the pipe. I wasn't necessarily the laziest person, but I was the DLH designated light holder, and I was providing emotional support through smart-ass comments. So I was definitely taking the job the least seriously. Story 31, back when I was a cashier at Borders, we had to keep a certain percentage of Borders reward transactions. I was good at my job and was able to get in the high 80s, low 90s every month by being a good salesman and convincing them to get it. There was another guy I worked with that had an insanely high percentage, and I didn't understand how he did it. We later came to find out that he would just swipe a card and put it into people's bags without saying anything about it. He got caught and was given a warning and put on probation instead of being fired for cheating. Fast forward about a month, and I find out he's getting promoted to work on the floor with all the movies and music. I could not believe they promoted him after all that and looked me over, someone that was actually a hard worker that did a really good job and often would have people compliment me to my managers. Then again, the management I eventually got fired from there because the guy covering for me while I was on vacation got fired, and they somehow expected me to know and come in. Story 32, I work in finance at a large multinational corporation. I feel like a big part of our job is to just stop doing things and wait to see who complains. If someone complains, we keep doing it. If silence, then we call it control drop and put it on our performance review for creating efficiencies. Story 33, I had an Excel order form my last job that required us to enter all hardware items from all suppliers in by hand. I had to completely rewrite the existing script that pulled the hardware for the one supplier that it worked on, but it went from being a time-consuming, mistake-prone job to clicking a button on the order form and it doing everything and taking maybe 2 seconds for a huge job. Figuring out dynamic named ranges and getting them to work with drop-down boxes was also great. No more manually updating named ranges and drop-down boxes. When new items were added, I also added in conditional formatting everywhere to let the user know if there was an incomplete section on the form. No more rework when the next person down the line sent the form back to us incomplete. The thing I was really happy with was being able to cut the length of that script down by about 65 from what it originally was. Story 34, I'm a lazy long distance runner. Have done a 5-hour marathon, have done a 4-hour marathon. At the end of the 4-hour marathon, all I could think was I could have been on my feet for another hour, going for 5 next year. Story 35, my professor asked me to check the answer sheets of a test. By utilizing the readily available algorithms in image processing machine learning, I made a mobile app that takes a picture of the answer sheet and returns the score. Story 36, I used to have to make 2 contracts for every person I brought on a traveling training team. I said 2 contracts was stupid and made them into 1, sent it to our lawyers, and they approved it. Still took me too god long to update each contract with different names, pay rates, and dates. Went on Rexel and found out how to make a mailer list, and hours of work takes me 10 minutes. I didn't tell anyone this, though, so I just take my time. Then I had to make floor maps for restaurants to send to the company that puts them into our scheduling program. Well, all of our restaurants are cookie cutter, so I just use Paint to piece them together rather than make all of them each time. I'm fucking Picasso with Microsoft Paint. Then they wanted me to use Excel to keep track of training teams. One of my coworkers used Smartsheet and loves to teach people things. So I jump on Smartsheet with her, and she shows me around. Way easier and easier publishing it so that people can see the teams but not mess up any info. Using forms to not have to ask them 30 questions that auto-populate my Smartsheet. Sharing it with payroll so they never have to reach out to me. Templates on Outlook, tons of stuff. I basically took a lot of my job, said fuck that there has to be an easier way, asked on Reddit or just Googled things, and spend maybe an hour learning something that will save me many hours in the future. I always tell people to just Google things. They say, I don't know what to Google, and I say whatever your problem is, just Google it the exact same way you'd say it to me. Then when they Google Excel thing that makes this do, that they are shocked that they find their answer. Story 37, I had to research a U.S. senator or something Durbin, and I couldn't find a lot of information on him. I didn't want to spend 1 to 2 hours researching somebody I didn't care about, so I went to his website and directly emailed him my research questions. He never responded. I once ordered a painter to paint my bathroom walls. His price was extortionate for the small job, and he only had a relatively small brush to complete it. It was a pretty lousy paint job because of the small brush, so a few weeks later, I finally convinced myself to get another painter, but just a cheap one to go over the bad job done by this other guy. Instead of using just a brush, he had a huge roller and consequently got the job done much quicker. He did a great job and charged significantly less than the other guy. Lee from Lee's Painting, wherever you are, thanks, said it, oh my god, first ever award of any type on Reddit. Thank you, Lee would be proud of me. Story 38, when I was like 10, I had to sweep the house and walk the dogs. These were my only 2 chores, but I was a lazy little twerp. So I tied a towel to my dog back legs, then put a toy on the back of my remote control car and released the hounds. Mom came out to see all 3 dogs knocking over the table trying to get the toy, with their legs essentially tied together. I was a problem child. Edit, this is my first comment ever. And OMG, I got so much attention. I don't know what a silver does, but thank you, stranger. Story 39, teacher here. We have a 3rd grade classroom with mixed ages. This year, we decided to assign a big project in pairs. We have a 3rd grade boy who's cynical, argumentative, and refuses to do work even though he's extremely intelligent and capable. We decided in an effort to get work out of him, we'd pair him with a very energetic kindergarten boy that has underdeveloped, 5-year-old, reading and writing skills. Anyway, the older boy typed sentences on the computer in big 20-point text and gave it to the kindergarten boy to trace on our lightboard, as well as pictures to color. Well played. Story 41 time, we were selling an electric lift at work, and I loaded it with the forklift, but we had to push it all the way in his truck at a weird angle. They had some ideas, but before they could stop me from doing it the way I wanted, I just pushed it in by its forks with my forks. Touch tips all the way and worked perfectly. I always try to do as much as I possibly can without getting out of the forklift. Story 41, when sweeping the concession stand at the movie theater I work at, instead of using the dustpan to slowly pick up all the trash, I sweep it all to one end and put the trash can on the floor and sweep it straight into there. Story 42, in high school, I had an absolute of a teacher. He gave me a binder that had the name, address, phone of every student in the entire district, including the names off all of their siblings. I was to type this, and even though it was already printed out, I asked if it was already printed, why was I typing it? He said they paid an outside firm a bunch of money to do it, but the state pulled the funding, and the firm refused to provide the files, and now the district didn't have the money to do it again, but they still needed the data. I was super pissed about how tedious of a job I was given and bitched to no end. He knew that I was the winner of a typing contest and agreed that this one project would be my entire grade for the semester. If I could manage to get it all entered into the computer by the end of the year ID, get a passing grade. If not ID, fail. After about 2 hours of data entry, I decided it was a bullshit job and downloaded OCR software, scanned the whole thing in, and spent a day or two correcting scanning mistakes. My plan was to spend the rest of the semester goofing off and pretending to work. That lasted about a week before the teacher caught on. He then proceeded to start giving me more stupid, tedious work and said the previous deal was now off. I found out that part of the reason the deal with the consulting firm ended badly was his fault and told him I was under the school board with this information. We decided on a new plan. My grade for the semester would pass as an A. But I had free time to take on other classes the teacher offered. I used this free time to complete 1.5 other courses. TLDR, my laziness got me 5 course credits in the span of time. I would have gotten only 1.